Hi, everybody. This is Teresa Sullivan. This is an instructional video, and it's a rainy day in June. It's not just a song by that great 60s band, The Kinks. It's also literally a rainy day in June, and beading is a good rainy day activity. So I am going to do some beading for you. I'm going to do a screen share so you can see what I'm doing up close. The reason I'm making this video is that I don't want that in there. Okay, good. Is that a student of mine just wanted to be able to see this happening, not just in class, not just on, a couple-hour workshop, but for future reference. So I thought I'd go into this in detail, finishing a thread off, and I'm using thread, not fireline. There's a difference between thread as in nylon ply thread and essentially a fishing line. So this is for thread finishing, and that includes silamide that I use, Nymo, 1G, Miyuki, there's a whole host of threads that you can use for beading. Back in the day, back in the 70s, somebody told me that people would use um, people would use what is it? Dental floss because there were so few beading threads. Well, we're luckier nowadays. We have a lot more choices. But how do you finish a thread so it's not a hassle? Well, as you can see, this is a piece that's dimensional. It's not flat. So doing those little half hitch knots that I often speak about is going to be a hassle. So in this case, what I'll do is I'm just going to weave back into the material. And this I'll do even if I do half hitch knots. See how I was going that direction. I was coming, my last stitch was this orange bead right here. I went at my last bead that I added was right here. I went through this turquoise bead and I was going that direction. Well, I switched direction and went into the bead directly under the last bead I went through. That might not seem like such a big deal, but it's essential to getting the thread not to just pull out. Because at this point, it still will pull out if you pull on that last stitch enough. So I'm continuing. I went from the bead right underneath the last bead I went through. I went through that bead and I just went through this bead right next to it. If I can, well, I'll give it a whirl. I'll do a half hitch knot I always do between the beads. You do a half hitch knot over the beads, you are going to have thread showing and you don't want that. And it can be kind of a hassle because it's a dimensional piece and you have to kind of dig out that little piece of thread that you want to go through. But I managed to do it. You can see there's just a piece of thread that I'm going through underneath. And I just see how much thread I have left. I'd rather spend money on beads rather than excess thread that I throw away. So I have just enough thread to use as I finish off the piece. I don't have 10 inches of thread and then I decide to stop working with that thread. I use as much thread as I can each time I string it. Check this out. I backed the needle. I made a loop and then I backed the needle through. Well, I'll do it again. I'm going to make that loop bigger. I made a loop and there's a little tiny loop of thread. And because my thread is shorter than my needle, I back the needle through. I don't poke it through the front from the pokey end. I poke it through from the eye of the needle end. And because the needle is bendable, hooray, I can get it out of there again. So that was a half hitch knot. I was able to do that. If it's not possible to do a half hitch knot due to the logistics of what you just made, you can also keep going and do another turnaround. So I did one turnaround already, and I'm turning around again. And oop, I broke my needle. Ah, that's not that big a deal because I only have a couple stitches to go, and I think I can get the needle through. Now this bead already has at least 3 stitches going through it again. So that I'm stuffing that particular bead with thread, and that in itself will help prevent the thread from just unraveling. So I go through there. I want to go through one more and I'll call it a day. Then I'm using doubled thread. There are some advantages to it. It's twice as strong. And let's see if I can go through one more. And you'll see I've gone through this bead a bunch of times as well. Okay, yeah, I can go through it one more time. And that thread should be secure. The way I can check is to get this guy tight, good and tight. I'll pull on the last bead I put on. And yeah, it's a bit wiggly, but it's not gonna pull out. It's not gonna give off completely. So all I do is flip it as close as I can with these tiny little embroidery scissors. And then I do have to discard that needle. Okay, a broken needle, what can I say? I have more needles. And if there's a little stub of thread poking out where I finally ended up, and there is, what I'll do is I'll just burn the end of the thread. And if I want to be really safe and secure about it, I will actually let the match go out, and the little the hot cherry of this match will go on there, and now that little tiny little nubbin of thread is disappeared and went up in smoke. I'm working on a white ceramic plate. Otherwise, I would put this in an appropriate place, like something. Well, this is actually a glass plate, a non-burnable surface, because this will burn things. So that's how I end things. I will do a combination of zigzagging back and through, not endlessly, as a student of mine called it, walking a country mile in with your stitches. You don't have to zigzag back endlessly, just do it a couple times, especially if you can manage to do a half hitch knot or two, you're good to go. It's not the end of the world. In my next video, I'll show you how to begin again with a new thread. The reason I want to emphasize little minutia like this on beginning and ending thread, especially if you're a beginner, is because it shouldn't be thought of as a hassle, but sometimes it is. And what one wonderful lady student of mine will do is she is averse. I mean, she has a phobia about having to change her thread over. So she'll work with many yards of thread, and she'll spend all her time getting her knots out of her thread, because when you work with thread that's too long, it knots up. And that takes time too. So she doesn't mind undoing the knots, but she does mind starting and stopping thread. So in my next video, I will start the new thread, and I will also mention a couple tidbits on, well, I'll just say it now. Just thread up a bunch of needles. If you know you're going to do a project that's at least this long, and then you'll have those needles right at your disposal, whether you break it or not. It's not going to interrupt your flow. You're not going to have a stopping point that hangs you up if you just have a quick way to end it, a quick way to start it, and a threaded needle ready to deploy back in the artwork. So see you soon. I will I will see you in the next video. Yeah. Blank. Okay, now the recording can stop. I'll see you next time. All right, I'm back. Now I'm going to thread a needle, which doesn't seem like a big deal for a lot of people, but when you're new, it is a big deal and it can be a hassle. So let's do that. Share my screen, blink, and off we go. There's a trick to it, and this is one of the tricks. Get good lighting. That's the first trick. Not really a trick, just a really good thing to do. As you can see from the thumbnail picture, I'm using a couple arm lengths of thread. That's a little long for me. Keep in mind that these two arm lengths are going to turn into one functional arm length because I'm using doubled thread. Now, this is what beeswax looks like when you've been working with it for years on end. So hope that doesn't gross you out. And if it does, you can always just take a little knife and shave off the icky parts or whatever. But this is beeswax, folks. It's good for conditioning thread. Silicamide is already waxed, so you don't have to wax the whole thing. I'm only waxing the very end of it, and because that helps me thread the needle. I hope you have some fingernails. I just take the very last tiny bit of thread and flatten it between the fingernails. Then I take my thread and see how much thread I have poking out. Not very much, right? What I'll do is, this is a little flat rectangular magnet. It's a good place to hold needles. I'll just make sure I have some, I can actually see the eye of the needle that I'm about to poke the thread through. And I have to angle it so that I can literally see daylight through that eye of the needle. But see how closely I'm holding the thread, the end of the thread to the end of my finger? It's, I only have a tiny amount because if I was back here and trying to thread it, it's just not going to happen. It's too wiggly. Wiggly is good for some things, not for threading needles. So back to the very end of the thread and the eye of the needle. And let's see. Come on, baby. I have to rotate the needle so I can see through the eye of the needle. And here we go. And see how much I have that went through? Not very much, huh? That's all it takes, though. Grab that little tiny bit and pull. That's all you need to thread the needle. It only has to go through that far, is what I'm saying. And because I am using doubled thread, and again, if you're a seasoned beader, I don't know if you're just watching this for thrills and chills, but if you're not a seasoned beater, this is good to know because it's just stuff that experienced beaters don't think about anymore because it's so routine for them. And I don't know if you'll find it in YouTube videos or not, but the real super basics sometimes really hang people up. So that's why I'm doing this. I don't want you to get hung up on the very beginnings of it and get discouraged. So what I did was I put the needle halfway down my thread because I'm doubling it. And now I have a threaded needle. What I normally would do, if I wasn't going to bore you to tears threading 10 needles at once, would be if I'm doing depending on the size of the project, I would thread at least 3 to 10 needles, 3 to 8 needles, really. Again, 3 to 8 needles, really. Again, 3 to 3 to 8 needles, really. 3 to 3 to 8 needles, really. Again, 3 to 3 to 8 needles, really. 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 3 to 3 to that's just a personal preference. It's not the bead law or anything. But now that we have a threaded needle, what do? We can start over again. The way I start over again. Now this is for a three-dimensional piece. And the beauty of a three-dimensional piece is no one can see your knots. You can make a big old Herkin knot, which is to say, I don't know if anybody's mom taught him this, but just wrap the thread around your bend your finger two, three times and roll it off the end of your finger. Those three wraps. And what that does is it makes a twist, and then you pinch that twisted part and pull, and it turns into a big old Herkin knot. The great part about 3D work is that you will not see that big old Herkin knot if it's inside the piece, unless you're using completely clear, no color beads, or you're using black thread or something, or purple thread. You can do that if you like as a design decision. Clear beads are wonderful for colored threads. But for now, let's assume that you do not want to see that big old Herkin knot. What I'll do is I have to identify the restarting spot. And the restarting spot, basically with peyote stitch, whether in round or flat, is going to be an up bead, down bead, up bead, down bead, up bead, down bead. And this is a little tricky because the beads are different sizes, but it's still fundamentally an up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, oop, up, down, down. The up, down, down spot is the spot where I resume in the middle of that up, down, down spot. It resumes, it goes up, down, down, and like up, down, and up, down again. But anytime you have that up, down, down spot, that's the indicator that you have that shows that that's the spot where you stopped. Actually, because, focus, baby. Here we go. Because this is a stitch, it's a circular stitch, and the number of stitches are even, there is actually a down, up, up spot, but that's the spot at the beginning of the row. So if I had finished my previous bead needle with thread after doing this step up spot, then I could start anywhere I wanted to. However, I did not completely finish the row. So that left me with my step up spot, which is it's hard to see, but you'll have to trust me on this. The orange bead is the last bead that I would go through on this stitch. On this row, this bead is going to be the actual last bead I string for this row, and then this bead and this bead are the two beads I would step up into. So that's the beginning of the row, but the end of my row, because I didn't finish it, has an up, down, and down spot. It's that up, down, and down spot. The middle part of that up, down, and down spot is where I want to resume my beading. What I'll do, even let's say that this was a two-dimensional piece and I needed to hide my knot or get rid of my knot once I was done with it, I would still do that big old Herkin knot. I'm coming up, and I'll do this even if I don't need to trim my knot off. I'll come up 3 beads behind. In other words, 2 beads behind, I guess. This is my restarting spot, the bead that I want to go to before I restart and start stringing anything. So I count 2 beads behind that on a diagonal. And I go into that. I came up from underneath because I don't want to have to trim my knot if I don't have to. And I don't have to because it's 3D. I'm almost there. I go through 1 more bead. here. Hopefully I don't break the bead. We'll find out. I went through this a whole bunch of times on the way out, so I lucked out. I didn't break my bead from inside. One more bead, and now I'm at my, once I go through this bead, I'm ready to restart. Now, because this is 3D and I've got that big old herkin knot down in there, I could just go along my merry way and start beading, start stringing beads and stitching again. However, just to be on the safe side, and also for all those out there sweating through a two-dimensional piece, if you do need to get rid of your knot, all you have to do is do a half hitch knot. Come on, baby. And notice I'm making sure to pass the needle through the old thread that goes down from this bead down to the bead right below it. When I initially finished that, you can look at that again on the previous video. That's my leave-off spot, let's call it. And it's kind of cranky. It's kind of tight. So I'm going to see if I can come through this away. Sometimes 3D work is a little more of a hassle. And I managed to poke the needle through right below that restarting spot. And I got it, let's see if I can show this to you. I got it around the thread that's going from this bead to that bead. So I make a loop again. I pass the needle through the loop. I draw it up tight, and the knot disappears between those beads. Now, if I needed to, again, I could go back and trim that knot. I'm not going to, because it's a three-dimensional piece, and once I do a few more rows, it's just going to be behind the scenes, inside the tube. But again, if I needed to, if I did a two-dimensional piece, I would do the same exact thing. I would come in this, I would restart with coming in through this bead, and this bead, tie that half hitch knot like I just did. And I'll do one more stitch. I'll do my first stitch of the new seam here with the new thread. And then after that first stitch, I would trim the knot. Again, you don't have to, because you don't have to, but you need to, if you have to, then you can. What do I have here? Ooh, do I have, oh, okay. Just making sure I didn't end up with unauthorized thread showing. That was okay. It just doesn't, it was a matter of a situation that happens with doubled thread sometimes, which is your needle gets off center and some of the thread lags. So in any case, at this point, I'm ready to restart. And since I'm at it, I may as well show you, this is my step up spot. So I'm going through two, not one. And what I was talking about earlier is now that I've done the step up, if you look at your up and down beads, basically they're all even. There are no, because the row is completed, I've got an up bead, down, up, 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 down, and up. And there are no anomalies. There are no down, up spots or up, down spots. So that's some minutia in starting and stopping. It might sound painstaking because I'm going through it so slowly at this point, But once you do this a few times, it just gets faster and faster and easier. It's less and less of a big deal. And you don't feel so compelled to have 10 arm lengths of thread because you're not phobic about swapping out your thread and finishing off your thread and getting a new thread started. It's just, and you have several needles already threaded up on your little handy dandy, bead, a little uh, magnet or whatever container you have for needles, and you can just seamlessly, pardon the pun, go through and stop and restart your thread with relative ease. One note about thread and needles and things, especially threaded needles, or even just thread. Pets sometimes eat thread. That includes kitty cats and some dogs, I've heard. So that is, you, by all means, unless it can be life-threatening to an animal. What happens is, like, you have like way more, a long piece of thread that gets in their guts, and you're at best you're looking at an extremely expensive bill if you're lucky, if your kitty, cat, or your dog is lucky. So by all means, keep your needles and your thread, whether threaded or not, safely away from your pets, because pets are fun and they like to play with things, but that's not something they want to play with because it's not going to be fun for them. So anyway, on that happy note, let's keep our pets adorably safe and our beads fun, um, and yeah, thread a bunch of needles up and do this without too much hassle. The less hassle, the more likely you are to have fun doing it. So thanks a lot. I'll see you next time. Glasses off. Bye.